Hello, Year 5. Welcome to Tuesday, the 19th of January 2021's guided reading lesson. Our target is an inference target, and it's I can make inferences from the text. Our vocabulary check before we start, and don't forget to note these definitions down in your books. We have got mauve, cascading, concealed, and captive. We are now going to read the chapter named Phasalia physalis on page 93. The silver grey Mercedes SL600 cruised down the motorway travelling south. Alex was sitting in the front passenger seat, with so much soft leather around him that he could barely hear the 389 horsepower 6-litre engine that was carrying him towards the sail complex near Port Talon, Cornwall. But at 80 miles per hour, the engine was only idling. Alex could feel the power of the car, £100,000 worth of German engineering. One touch from the thin, unsmiling chauffeur, and the Mercedes would leap forward. This was a car that sneered at speed limits. Alex had been collected that morning from a converted church in Hampstead, North London. This was where Felix Lester lived. When the driver had arrived, Alex had been waiting with his luggage, and there'd even been a woman, an MI6 operative, kissing him, telling him to clean his teeth, waving goodbye. As far as the driver was concerned, Alex was Felix. That morning, Alex read through the file and knew that Lester went to a school called St. Anthony's, had 2 sisters and a pet Labrador. His father was an architect. His mother designed jewellery. A happy family. His family, if anybody asked. How far is it to Port Talon? He asked. So far the driver had barely spoken a word. He answered Alex without looking at him. A few hours. You want some music? Got any John Lennon? That wasn't his choice. According to the file, Felix Lester liked John Lennon. No. Forget it, I'll get some sleep. He needed the sleep. He was still exhausted from the training and wondered how he would explain all the half-healed cuts and bruises if anyone saw under his shirt. Maybe he'd tell them he got bullied at school. He closed his eyes and allowed the leather to suck him into sleep. It was the feeling of the car slowing down that woke him. He opened his eyes and saw a fishing village, the blue sea beyond, a swathe of rolling green hills and a cloudless sky. It was a picture of a jigsaw puzzle, or perhaps a holiday brochure advertising a forgotten England. Seagulls swooped and cried overhead. An old tug, tangled nets, smoke and flaking paint, pulled into the quay. A few locals, fishermen and their wives, stood around watching. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the village was caught in the silvery, fragile light that comes at the end of a perfect day. Port Talon, the driver said. He must have noticed Alex opening his eyes. It's pretty. Not if you're a fish. They drove round the edge of the village and back inland, down a lane that twisted between strangely bumpy fields. Alex saw the ruins of buildings, half-crumbling chimneys and rusting metal wheels, and knew that he was looking at an old tin mine. They'd mined tin in Cornwall for 3,000 years, until one day the tin had run out. Now all that was left were the holes. A couple of kilometres down the lane, a linked metal fence sprang up. It was brand new, 10 metres high, topped with razor wire. Arc lamps on scaffolding towers stood at regular intervals, and there were huge signs, red on white. You could have read them from the next county. Sale Enterprises, strictly private. Trespassers will be shot, Alex muttered to himself. He remembered what Mrs. Jones had told him. He's more or less got his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Well, that was certainly his own first impression. The whole complex was somehow shocking, alien to the sloping hills and fields. The car reached the main gate, where there was a security cabin and an electronic barrier. A guard in a blue and grey uniform with SE printed on his jacket waved them through. The barrier lifted automatically, and then they were following a long, straight road over a stretch of land that had somehow been hammered flat, with an airstrip on one side and a cluster of 4 high-tech buildings on the other. The buildings were large, smoked glass and steel, each one joined to the next by a covered walkway. There were two aircraft next to the landing strip, a helicopter and a small cargo plane. Alex was impressed. The whole complex must have been about 5 kilometres square. It was quite an operation. The Mercedes came to a roundabout with a fountain at the centre, swept round it, and continued up towards a fantastic sprawling house. It was Victorian, red brick topped with copper domes and spires that had long ago turned green. There must have been at least 60 windows on the 5 floors facing the drive. It was a house that just didn't know when to stop. The Mercedes pulled up at the main entrance and the driver got out. "Follow me." "What about my luggage?" Alex asked. "It'll be brought." Alex and the driver went through the front door and into a hall dominated by a huge canvas, Judgment Day, the end of the world, painted 4 centuries ago as a swirling mass of doomed souls and demons. There were works of art everywhere, watercolours and oils, prints, drawings, sculptures in stone and bronze, all crowded together with nowhere for the eye to rest. Alex followed the driver along a carpet so thick that he almost bounced. He was beginning to feel claustrophobic and was relieved when they passed through a door and into a vast room that was practically bare. "Mr. Sale will be here shortly," the driver said, and left. Alex looked around him. This was a modern room with a curving steel desk near the centre, carefully positioned halogen lights, and a spiral staircase leading down from a perfect circle cut in the ceiling high above. One entire wall consisted of a single sheet of glass, and, walking over to it, Alex realised that he was looking at a gigantic aquarium. The sheer size of the thing drew him towards it. It was hard to imagine how many thousands of litres of water the glass held back, but he was surprised to see that the tank was empty. There were no fish, although it was big enough to hold a shark. And then something moved in the turquoise shadows, and Alex gasped with a mixture of horror and wonderment as the biggest jellyfish he had ever seen drifted into view. The main body of the creature was a shimmering, pulsating mass of white and mauve, shaped roughly like a cone. Beneath it, a mass of tentacles covered with circular stingers twisted in the water at least 10 metres long. As the jellyfish moved or drifted in an artificial current, its tentacles writhed against the glass so that it looked almost as if it was trying to break out. It was the single most awesome and repulsive thing Alex had ever seen. "Phasalia physalis," the voice came from behind him, and Alex twisted round to see a man coming down the stairs. Herod Sale was short. He was so short that Alex's first impression was that he was looking at a reflection that had somehow been distorted. In his immaculate and expensive black suit, with gold signet ring and brightly polished black shoes, he looked like a scaled-down model of a multi-millionaire businessman. His skin was very dark, so that his teeth flashed when he smiled. He had a round, bald head and very horrible eyes. The grey irises were too small, completely surrounded by white. Alex was reminded of tadpoles before they hatch. When Sale stood next to him, the eyes were almost at the same level as his, and held less warmth than the jellyfish. "The Portuguese man-o'-war," Sale continued. He had a heavy accent brought with him from the Beirut marketplace. "It's beautiful, don't you think?" "I wouldn't keep one as a pet," Alex said. "I came upon this one when I was diving in the South China Sea." Sale gestured at a glass display case, and Alex noticed 3 harpoon guns and a collection of knives resting in velvet slots. "I love to kill fish," Sale went on, "but when I saw this specimen of Phasalia physalis, I knew I had to capture it and keep it. You see, it reminds me of myself. It's 99% water, it has no brain, no guts, and no anus." Alex had dredged up the facts from somewhere and had spoken them before he knew what he was doing. Sale glanced at him, then turned back to the creature hovering over him in his tank. "It's an outsider," he said. "It drifts on its own, ignored by the other fish. It is silent, and yet it demands respect. You see the nematocysts, Mr. Lester, the stinging cells? If you were to find yourself wrapped in those, it would be an exquisite death." "Call me Alex," Alex said. He'd meant to say Felix, but somehow it had slipped out. It was the most stupid, the most amateurist mistake he could have made. But he had been thrown by the way Sale had appeared and by the slow, hypnotic dance of the jellyfish. The grey eyes squirmed. I thought your name was Felix. My friends call me Alex. Why? After Alex Ferguson, I'm a big fan of Manchester United, and he was the best manager they ever had. It was the first thing Alex could think of, but he'd seen a football poster in Felix Leicester's bedroom and knew that at least he'd chosen the right team. Sale smiled. That's most amusing, Alex. It shall be. And I hope we shall be friends, Alex. You are a very lucky boy. You won the competition and you are going to be the first teenager to try out my Stormbreaker. But this is also lucky, I think, for me. I want to know what you think of it. I want you to tell me what you like, what you don't. The eyes dipped away and suddenly he was businesslike. We have only 3 days until the launch, he said. We'd better get a bloody move on, as my father used to say. I'll have my man take you to your room, and tomorrow morning, first thing, you must get to work. There's a maths program you should try, also languages. All the software was developed here at Sale Enterprises. Of course, we've talked to children, we've gone to teachers, to education experts, but you, my dear Alex, you will be worth more to me than all of them put together. As he had talked, Sale had become more and more animated, carried away by his own enthusiasm. He had become a completely different man. Alex had to admit that he'd taken an immediate dislike to Herod Sale. No wonder Blunt and the people at MI6 mistrusted him. But now he was forced to think again. He was standing opposite one of the richest men in England, a man who had decided, out of the goodness of his heart, to give a huge gift to British schools. Just because he was small and slimy, that didn't necessarily make him an enemy. Perhaps Blunt was wrong after all. Ah, here's my man now, Sale said. About bloody time. The door had opened and a man had come in, dressed in the black suit and tails of an old-fashioned butler. He was as tall and as thin as his master was short and round, with a thatch of ginger hair above a face so pale it was almost paper white. From a distance it had looked as if he was smiling, but as he drew closer Alex gasped. The man had 2 horrendous scars, one on each side of his mouth, twisting up all the way to his ears. It was as if someone had attempted to cut his face in half. The scars were a gruesome shade of mauve. There were smaller, fainter scars where his cheeks had once been stitched. This is Mr. Grin, Sale said. He's changed his name after the accident. Accident? Alex found it hard not to stare at the terrible wounds. Mr. Grin used to work in a circus. It was a novelty knife-throwing act. For the climax, he used to catch a spinning knife between his teeth, but then one night his elderly mother came to see the show. She waved to him from the front row and he got his timing wrong. He's worked for me for 12 years now, and although his appearance may be displeasing, he's loyal and efficient. Don't try to talk with him, by the way. He has no tongue. Mr. Grin said. Nice to meet you, Alex muttered. Take him to the blue room, Sale commanded. He turned to Alex. You're fortunate that one of our nicest rooms has come up free, here in the house. We had a security man staying there, but he left us quite suddenly. Oh, why was that? Alex asked casually. I have no idea. One moment he was here, the next he was gone. Sale smiled again. I hope you won't do the same, Alex. Mr. Grin gestured at the door, and, leaving Herod Sale standing in front of his huge captive, Alex left the room. He was led along a passage, past more works of art, up a staircase, and then along a wide corridor with thick wood-panelled doors and chandeliers. Alex assumed that the main house was used for entertaining. Sale himself must live here, but the computers would be constructed in the modern buildings he had seen opposite the airstrip. Presumably he would be taking there tomorrow. His room was at the far end. It was a large room with a 4-poster bed and a window looking out onto the fountain. Darkness had fallen, and the water, cascading 10 meters through the air over a semi-naked statue that looked remarkably like Herod Sale, was eerily illuminated by a dozen concealed lights. Next to the window was a table with an evening meal already laid out for him: ham, cheese, salad. His bag was lying on the bed. He went over to it, a Nike sports bag, and examined it. When he had closed it up, he had inserted 3 hairs into the zip, trapping them in the metal teeth. They were no longer there. Alex opened the bag and went through it. Everything was exactly as it had been when he had packed, but he was certain that the sports bag had been expertly and methodically searched. He took out the Nintendo DS, inserted the Speed Wars cartridge, and pressed the start button 3 times. At once the top screen lit up with a green rectangle, the same shape as the room. He lifted the Nintendo up and swung it around him, following the line of the walls. A red flashing dot suddenly appeared on the top screen. He walked forward, holding the Nintendo in front of him. The dot flashed faster, more intensely. He had reached a picture hanging next to the bathroom, a squiggle of colours that looked suspiciously like a Picasso. He put the Nintendo down and carefully lifted the canvas off the wall. The bug was taped behind it, a black disc about the size of a 10-pence piece. Alex looked at it for a minute, wondering why it was there. Security? Or was Sale such a control freak that he had to know what his guests were doing every minute of the day and night? Alex put the picture back. There was only one bug in the room. The bathroom was clean. He ate his dinner, showered, and got ready for bed. As he passed the window, he noticed activity in the grounds near the fountain. There were lights shining out of the modern buildings. 3 men, all dressed in white overalls, were driving towards the house in an open-top jeep. 2 more men walked past. These were security guards, dressed in the same uniform as the man at the gate. They were both carrying semi-automatic machine guns, not just a private army, but a well-armed one. He got into bed. The last person who had slept here had been his uncle, Ian Ryder. Had he seen something, looking out of the window? Had he heard something? What could have happened that meant he had to die? Sleep took a long time coming to the dead man's bed. Our quick quiz. Some questions you should be asking yourself. Why did Alex ask for John Lennon? What was surprising about the aquarium? What creature was in there? How did Mr. Grin get his scars? How did Alex know someone had been in his bag? And how did Alex find the bugs? When it's talking about bugs, it's not talking about insects. What type of bug is it talking about? And finally, your task that is in the back of your pink jotter. Your task today is: what is your first impression of Herod Sale and why? Can you use some evidence from the text to support your answer? So if you think he's a great man and very handsome, can you find evidence to back that up? Your extension: why did Sale become so animated? And why did Mr. Grin call himself that? Good luck, Year 5.